They called her the family's failure until they dined at her restaurant. To understand the crushing silence that fell over that dinner table, the one where my family sat unknowingly in my restaurant, you have to rewind 5 years. You have to go back to a different room, a different silence. The one that broke my world before I could rebuild it. It all began in the grand, sterile living room of the Vance family estate, a place that always felt more like a museum than a home. I was 24, standing on an Aubusson rug that cost more than the car I dreamed of owning. The air was thick with the scent of lemon polish and old money. My father, Richard Vance, was seated in his throne-like wingback chair, a monolith of industry and expectation. My mother, Eleonora, was perched on a silk settee, her posture as rigid as her principles. My older sister, Serafina, was examining her flawless manicure, a portrait of bored superiority, while my younger brother, Julian, was trying to become invisible in the corner. This was my audience, my jury. I had rehearsed the words 100 times, but they still felt like stones in my throat. I have something to tell you. I began, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. I cleared my throat and tried again, forcing strength into my tone. I won't be continuing with the MBA program at Wharton. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating. It was a physical presence in the room pressing down on me. My father didn't move, but the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to grow louder, counting down the seconds to my execution. Serafina finally broke the spell with a short, sharp laugh, a sound like ice cracking. My mother's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together. Don't be ridiculous, Alara. Of course you're continuing. The deposit has been paid. We've already told the Astors you'd be graduating the same year as their son. Her focus, as always, was on the optics, the social chessboard, where we were all just pawns in her game of maintaining the Vance family legacy. I'm not being ridiculous, I said, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I'm not going back. I've been accepted to the Institute of Culinary Arts. If the first silence was heavy, this one was a void. It sucked all the air from the room. I watched my father's jaw tighten, a muscle twitching in his temple. He slowly placed his crystal glass of whiskey on the mahogany side table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He rose to his full, intimidating height, his shadow stretching across the room to engulf me. Let me be perfectly clear, he said, his voice dangerously low, stripped of all warmth. You will do no such thing. Cooking? He paused, tasting the word as if it were poison. Cooking is a servant's work. Vances hire chefs. We do not become them. We build empires, we manage capital, we dictate policy. We do not concern ourselves with the seasoning of a duck confit. The condescension in his voice was a physical blow. It was meant to shame me, to shrink me back into the box they had built for me. It's not just cooking, father. It's passion. It's art. It's the only thing... I trailed off, knowing my words were useless. They didn't speak the language of passion, only of profit and prestige. Passion. Eleonora's voice was like a shard of glass. You speak of passion while you drag our family name through the mud. What will I tell people that my daughter of Vance has chosen to be a line cook, to sweat in a hot kitchen with common laborers? This is a disgrace. You are actively choosing to tarnish everything we have built. Serafina, ever the opportunist, chimed in, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Oh, Alara, always the little rebel with her quaint projects. I give it 6 months before you come crawling back, begging Dad to get you an entry-level position somewhere. Let's see how much passion you have when you're earning minimum wage. I looked to Julian, my last hope for a sliver of support. But he couldn't meet my gaze. He was staring intently at the intricate pattern on the rug, his face flushed with what I knew was not support, but shame. Embarrassment for me. That hurt more than the open hostility. My father raised a hand, demanding silence. This is the end of the discussion. You will inform the culinary school that you have made an error. You will re-enroll at Wharton. This fleeting, childish fantasy is over. Something inside me, something I thought had been crushed long ago, finally snapped. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it rang with the clarity of a bell. They all stared at me, shocked that I would dare to defy a direct order. No, I repeated louder this time. My entire life has been lived according to your expectations. The right schools, the right friends, the right future. I've been suffocating. This is the first decision I have ever made for myself, and I am not backing down. I would rather be happy in a kitchen than miserable in a boardroom. Richard Vance's face became an unreadable mask of cold fury. Then you have made your choice, and so we shall make ours. If you walk out that door to pursue this hobby, you walk out as an individual, not as a Vance. The family legacy you hold in such contempt will no longer be available to you. You will have no access to the family funds, no trust, no support, nothing. You will be disowned. Is your little dream worth that? He thought he had me cornered. He thought the threat of financial exile would be enough. But he didn't understand. They had never understood. The money was just the gilded bars of the cage. Yes, I said, my voice shaking but firm. It is. The finality of it hung in the air. I turned and walked out of the room, their stunned and furious faces burning into my back. I went to my bedroom, a place that suddenly felt like a stranger's, and packed a single small suitcase with the few things that felt truly mine. My worn-out cookbooks, a handful of clothes, and not much else. As I headed for the grand staircase, a soft hand touched my arm. It was Anya, our housekeeper, who had been with the family since before I was born. She had been the one to find me in the kitchen as a little girl covered in flour and joy, and instead of scolding me, she had smiled and shown me how to properly knead dough. Her eyes, full of a warmth I had never seen in my own mother's, were sad but proud. I heard she whispered, her voice a thick, comforting accent from her homeland. She pressed something small, cool, and metallic into my palm and closed my fingers around it. This was your grandmother's. Your mother put it away after she passed. She never approved of it. I opened my hand. Lying in my palm was a simple antique silver locket, tarnished with age. Engraved on its surface was a single delicate olive branch. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had been the one who secretly taught me that food was love. She had a passion that the Vance family had tried and failed to extinguish. "Don't you ever let them put out your fire, little one," Anya said, squeezing my hand. "It burns brighter than all their gold." A sharp voice cut through our quiet moment. "Anya, what is that piece of junk?" My mother, Eleonora, stood at the top of the stairs, her face a mask of disgust. "I thought I threw that thing out years ago. Give it here, Alara. That cheap trinket has no place leaving this house. It is a reminder of a sentimentality the Vances cannot afford." I looked from my mother's cold, demanding face to the locket in my hand. A choice. It was the whole conflict in miniature, their world of polished, empty status, versus a world of genuine, heartfelt passion. I closed my fist tightly around the locket, the metal digging into my skin. "No," I said to her for the second time that day. "It belongs with me." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked down the stairs past the portraits of stern-faced ancestors and toward the heavy front door. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, could feel their collective judgment, but for the first time it didn't matter. The weight of their expectations was finally lifting. As the massive oak door clicked shut behind me, the sound sealing my exile, I stood for a moment on the cold stone steps. The world suddenly seemed vast and terrifying. I had a few $1,000s to my name, a suitcase, and a culinary school acceptance letter. I was officially disowned, but as I clutched the antique locket in my pocket, I felt a different kind of inheritance settle over me. They thought they had cast me out, that they had won by taking away my name and my security. They had no idea. They hadn't pushed me into the darkness, they had pushed me toward the fire, and my hands, which my mother insisted should only be for show, were finally ready to build something of their own. The hands that my mother had insisted were made only for displaying heirloom rings were now plunged into ice water, trying to soothe the angry red kiss of a hot pan. That was my new reality. My exile was not a gentle drift away from my family. It was a violent shove into the cold, harsh, and gloriously real world. They thought they had pushed me into darkness, but they were mistaken. In the searing heat of the crucible, I began to forge myself anew. The first year was a blur of exhaustion. The sprawling Vance estate was replaced by a cramped fourth-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that never slept, a place I shared with two other girls who were chasing their own desperate dreams. The scent of lemon polish was gone, replaced by the persistent odor of damp drywall and the ghost of 1,000 microwaved meals. My life narrowed to an 18-hour cycle of brutal, relentless work. I was a prep cook at a bustling bistro from dawn until midday, my world shrinking to the Sisyphean task of dicing onions, peeling potatoes, and gutting fish. My afternoons and evenings were spent on the line at a different restaurant, a chaotic ballet of fire and steam where I learned that speed was survival. Sleep was a luxury, a stolen handful of hours that never felt like enough. My body, once coddled and cared for, became a canvas of my profession. A lattice of small silvery scars from errant knives crisscrossed my fingers. The insides of my forearms were decorated with a constellation of burns, each one a testament to a lesson learned the hard way. This was the tuition for my dream paid in flesh. My mentor in this brutal new world was Chef Antoine Dubois, a tyrant of the kitchen and a genius of the palate. He was a terrifying Michelin-starred French chef who had been poached for a new ambitious restaurant. He was a man who communicated primarily in bellows of rage and the occasional terrifyingly quiet expression of disappointment. He saw the fire in me, but he had no interest in coddling it. He intended to temper it, to beat it into something sharp, strong, and useful. My first week, he made me chop parsley for 3 hours straight. Finer, he would roar, grabbing a handful and letting it fall through his fingers like green dust. "This is not a salad for cows, Mademoiselle Vance. This is a garnish. It must be an afterthought, a whisper of green, not a shout." He would throw a plate across the kitchen if the sauce was broken, his face turning a shade of purple I had never seen on a human being. But beneath the volcanic temper was a dedication to his craft that was absolute. He taught me that discipline was the bedrock of creativity, that you couldn't break the rules until you had mastered them with unquestioning devotion. He never praised me, not in words. His praise came in other forms, a sharp nod when he tasted a reduction I had spent hours perfecting. The responsibility of being trusted with the fish station on a busy Saturday night, the day he threw a chef's knife at the cutting board in front of me and grunted, "Yours. Stop using that piece of tin you call a blade." That knife felt heavier and more valuable than any diamond bracelet my father could have bought me. I worked, I bled, I burned, and I learned. I absorbed everything. The way the scent of garlic changes the exact moment it turns from fragrant to bitter. The precise feel of a perfect medium-rare steak at the tip of a finger. The complex symphony of a stock built over days. My life was this kitchen. My family, the line cooks and dishwashers who shared cigarettes in the alley behind the restaurant complaining about Dubois, but bound together by a shared respect for his relentless pursuit of perfection. They were a family forged in fire and toil, and they were more real to me than the one I had left behind. It was during my 3rd year under Dubois' mentorship that I first saw the man who would change everything. He was a regular, but a strange one. He always sat alone at a small, unassuming table in the corner. He was ageless, dressed in impeccably tailored but simple dark suits, and he had an aura of intense, unnerving stillness. He never sent compliments to the kitchen. He never complained. He would simply eat his eyes, missing nothing, and then he would leave. Chef Dubois loathed him. "That man, the alchemist he comes here to judge," he would mutter, watching the silent figure from the pass. "He tastes my soul on a fork and says nothing. It is the highest form of insult." One night, a shipment of extraordinary wild mushrooms arrived. They were so beautiful, so fragrant, that I felt a creative spark I hadn't allowed myself to indulge in months. On a whim, I stayed after my shift, using my own money to buy the mushrooms from the kitchen. I worked for hours crafting a dish that was purely mine, a wild mushroom tart with a black garlic soubise and a thyme-infused pastry. It was a piece of my soul on a plate. The next evening, seeing the alchemist at his usual table, I did something incredibly bold. I begged Dubois to let me serve my tart to him off-menu. Just that one table. Dubois, perhaps intrigued by my audacity, or simply wanting to see his silent tormentor react to something new, agreed with a dismissive wave. I watched through the small window of the kitchen doors as the tart was placed before him. He looked at it for a long moment, then picked up his fork. He took a single, deliberate bite. And then he did something I had never seen him do before. He put his fork down and simply sat there looking at the plate. He didn't take another bite. My heart sank. Failure. Humiliation. I could feel Dubois' angry glare on the back of my neck. But at the end of his meal, as he was leaving, he stopped at the kitchen door. He didn't ask for Dubois. He asked for the chef who had made the tart. Trembling, I stepped out, wiping my sweaty palms on my apron. He looked at me, his eyes a piercing, intelligent gray. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my hands at the network of scars and burns. These, he said, his voice a quiet baritone, are the hands of a builder. He then held out a card. It wasn't a business card. It was made of thick, heavy stock, completely black, with a single embossed symbol in the center. An Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail. Talent like yours shouldn't be hidden in someone else's kitchen. It is being wasted. When you are ready to build your own empire, this is how you will find me. And then he was gone. That card became my secret talisman. For 2 more years, I worked, saved, and learned, rising to become Dubois' sous chef. The card was tucked away with the silver locket from Anya, a twin promise of a future I was building toward. The day finally came when I knew I was ready. I had a vision, a concept, and a name for my restaurant, Ethelgard. I followed the cryptic instructions on the back of the card and found myself in a penthouse office overlooking the city face to face with the alchemist. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He listened to my business plan, his face unreadable. He looked at my meticulously costed out budgets and my innovative menu concepts. At the end of my presentation, he simply said, how much I told him the number, a figure so large it felt unreal to say out loud. He nodded once. The funds will be in an account for you by Monday. My investment has only one condition. My involvement remains completely, utterly anonymous. You will be the face, the name, and the sole proprietor in the eyes of the world. I am a ghost. And so Ethelgard was born. It was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. I was on the construction site every day, concrete dust in my hair, overseeing every detail from the grain of the wood on the tables to the weight of the custom-forged silverware. I designed the kitchen myself. I hired my staff, poaching the best from other restaurants' people who were drawn to my vision and my unwavering commitment. I built a team that became a new family. We opened our doors, and the success was immediate and explosive. Ethelgard became the hardest reservation to get in the city. Food critics wrote glowing, rhapsodic reviews. We were featured in magazines. The secret success was intoxicating, but it was mine alone. I kept my family at a distance, with only the occasional stilted phone call to my mother to assure her I was in her words managing. They knew I was in food. They had no idea I was building an empire. I wanted it that way. I needed to prove to myself that I could do it without the Vance name, without their money, without their approval. And then one crisp autumn afternoon, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my small apartment. It was heavy, expensive. On the back, embossed in gold, was the Vance family crest. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. It was an invitation, of course, announcing the engagement of my sister Seraphina to a Mr. Caspian Harrington. But it wasn't the engagement that made the breath catch in my throat. It was the location they had chosen for the celebration dinner. A place they had likely selected for its exclusivity, its prestige, its perfect reflection of their own status. The invitation read, "Dinner to be held at Ethelgard. Fate, I've learned, has a penchant for poetry. It often arranges our most significant moments with a theatrical flair that no playwright could ever script." And so it was that my family, the very people who had cast me out for choosing a life in the kitchen, had selected my sanctuary as the stage for their latest performance of affluence. They chose my battlefield to celebrate a victory. My victory. They just didn't know it yet. Walking through the heavy oak doors of Ethelgard that evening felt different. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience. The familiar scent of saffron roasting herbs and reduced wine, an aroma I had personally curated to be the restaurant's signature, usually centered me, reminded me of every brick I had laid, every battle I had won. Tonight, it only sharpened my anxiety, coiling in my stomach like a serpent. I was a stranger in my own home, an actress preparing for the role of a lifetime, the struggling black sheep. I had chosen my costume with meticulous care. A simple sleeveless black dress by a designer they wouldn't recognize elegant in its understatement. It was a quiet statement, one I knew they would misinterpret as making an effort with limited means. My only accessory was the antique silver locket Anya had given me, hidden beneath the fabric. Its cool weight a secret comfort against my skin. From the entryway I saw them. Of course, they had requested the center table, the one most visible to the rest of the dining room. They were arranged like a living portrait of the Vance family legacy, my mother Eleonora, a statue in Chanel tweed. my father Richard making a show of scrutinizing the wine list he couldn't possibly appreciate, and Serafina draped in a new season Gucci dress that screamed its price tag. Beside her sat her fiancé, Caspian Harrington, a man with slicked back hair, and a watch so ostentatious it caught the light with every move of his wrist. My brother Julian and his wife completed the tableau, looking as though they'd come straight from a board meeting, their faces etched with the permanent tension of corporate life. My hostess, a wonderful woman I'd hired for her warmth and discretion, approached me. "Good evening, Ms. V." She caught herself just in time, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before her professional mask slipped back into place. "Your party is already seated. May I show you to their table?" "Thank you, Maria," I murmured, grateful for her quick thinking. As I approached, my mother spotted me. Her eyes did the thing I remembered from childhood, a swift, dismissive scan from head to toe, a silent calculation of my worth that always found me lacking. "Alara, you've arrived," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed dining room. She rose to air-kiss my cheeks, her perfume a suffocating cloud of jasmine and judgment. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd gotten lost." "I'm exactly on time, Mother," I replied, glancing at my watch. It was a simple, functional timepiece, another detail that would not go unnoticed. My father stood offering a stiff, obligatory hug that felt more like a business transaction. "You look healthy," he offered. In the coded language of our family, this was not a compliment. It meant I wasn't rail thin, that I had the appearance of someone who actually ate the food they worked with a cardinal sin in their social circle. Serafina barely bothered to stand, offering only a cheek for me to kiss. "Ilara, this is Caspian," she announced, gesturing to the man beside her. He stood, his hand gripping mine a little too firmly, a classic power move. Princeton undergrad, Wharton MBA. He introduced himself, not with a greeting, but with a resume. Just made junior partner at his firm. There was no "nice to meet you," just a recitation of credentials, the official love language of the Vances. I took the last empty seat, the atmosphere already thick with the unspoken rules and expectations of their world. "We've already ordered champagne," my mother announced, as if granting me a great favor. "I do hope that's acceptable." I glanced at the bottle chilling in the ice bucket. It was the second most expensive vintage on my list. A classic power play, showy enough to broadcast wealth, but not so reckless as to suggest they didn't know the value of money. It was so predictably them. The first course arrived, a single, perfect amuse-bouche, a sphere of compressed melon with a dollop of fermented black garlic topped with a micro-basil leaf I'd sourced from a vertical farm in the city. My creation, my design. "Is this all?" Serafina asked, poking the single bite with her fork as if it were a strange insect. I'm famished. Caspian, eager to display his sophistication, peered at it. "Ah, an amuse-bouche. Bold. The umami notes of the garlic present a very audacious counterpoint to the melon's inherent sweetness. A challenging palate opener." He sounded like he was reading from a badly written script. I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. I caught him a moment later, angling his phone under the table, no doubt Googling amuse-bouche to make sure he'd used the term correctly. My father dismissed it with a wave. "Let's get to the wine." The sommelier, a man I had personally recruited from a 3-star restaurant in Paris, approached their table. He caught my eye, a flicker of a question in his expression. I gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of my head. He turned his attention to my father. "An excellent selection, sir," he said smoothly, presenting the bottle. "It should be," my father grumbled loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "The wine list here is adequate, but not particularly ambitious." I felt a hot flash of protective anger. Not for myself, but for my sommelier, a man who had forgotten more about wine than my father would ever know. I saw the professionalism in his eyes tighten for a second, a mask of courtesy hiding the insult. He poured the wine with flawless grace. The small talk began a minefield of passive aggression. They asked what I'd been up to, the question hanging in the air, dripping with the assumption that the answer would be disappointing. "I've been working," I said simply, "in the food industry." Still with that cooking phase, Serafina sighed, as if I'd just admitted to a persistent, unfortunate habit. "I truly thought you'd have moved on to something more substantial by now." "Not everyone is cut out for the corporate world, darling," my mother added, her voice laced with false pity that was more insulting than open scorn. The second course arrived a delicate composition of heirloom tomatoes with house-made ricotta and basil oil, a dish that had taken me months to perfect, balancing the acidity of the tomatoes with the creaminess of the cheese. Serafina pushed the tomatoes around her plate. "And what about your personal life, Ilara? Any prospects on the horizon, or are you still too busy playing with your food?" The question was a deliberate jab designed to highlight my single status as yet another failure in their eyes. Before I could answer, Caspian interjected, turning to Serafina with a smug, proprietary air. "My darling doesn't have to worry about a career. Once we're married, she can focus on charity boards and philanthropic work. Like my mother. A woman's place isn't in a stressful office." I watched as a shadow passed over Serafina's face, a flicker of something that looked like resentment, or perhaps disappointment, before she smoothed it over with a placid smile. It was a tiny crack in her perfect facade, but I saw it. She was in a gilded cage of her own, and a part of her knew it. Then came the main course. For my family, I had instructed the kitchen to prepare my proudest creation, a perfectly seared duck breast, with a cherry balsamic reduction, served on a bed of farro risotto. It was a complex, beautiful dish. It was a testament to my journey. My father took a bite. He chewed slowly, his expression thoughtful. I held my breath. For a foolish, fleeting moment, I thought he might actually appreciate it. He swallowed, took a sip of his wine, and looked at me. His eyes were cold. "This duck," he said, his voice flat. "It reminds me of your grandmother's cooking." My heart stopped. My grandmother was the only one who had ever understood my passion. She was always having these fanciful ideas in the kitchen. He continued, a cruel twist to his lips. All these ambitious little experiments. They never quite came together, of course. Too much passion, not enough discipline, just like this. It's a nice thought, but it's ultimately a failure. The words hit me with the force of a physical slap. He wasn't just insulting my food. He was insulting my grandmother's memory. He was taking the one pure, supportive relationship I'd had and twisting it into another example of my failure. I felt the silver locket against my skin suddenly cold. A white-hot, protective anger surged through me, so intense it made my vision swim for a second. This wasn't about me anymore. This was an attack on my craft, my staff, and the memory of the only person who had ever believed in me. I looked up and saw my server, a young, passionate woman named Chloe, standing a few feet away. She had heard my father's comment, and the hurt on her face was plain to see. She had helped me plate that dish. She had been so proud of it. In that moment, my resolve hardened. This was not just my family's high-class dinner. This was an emotional abuse I would no longer tolerate. As if on cue, Caspian pushed his plate forward. "This is undercooked," he declared loudly. "It's practically raw. Waiter, take this back." Chloe flinched but approached the table. "Is everything all right, sir?" "No, it's not all right. This duck is bleeding. I want it cooked." "Well done," he ordered, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. I met Chloe's panicked eyes across the table and gave her a slight, firm nod. She understood. She took his plate without another word. I knew she wouldn't ruin the beautiful piece of meat by overcooking it. She would instruct the kitchen to prepare a new one cooked to the consistency of a leather shoe, just as the ignorant customer had demanded. The conversation, or rather the interrogation, turned back to me. "So, Ilara," my mother said, her voice sharp, "you still haven't answered the question. A dinner like this, at a place like this, how exactly are you managing it? Serafina's wedding is going to be a significant expense for the family, and we need to be sure you aren't overextending yourself." "I manage my finances carefully," I said, my voice tight. "Oh, please," Serafina scoffed, leaning forward as if going in for the kill. "A single plate here costs more than you probably make in a week. Let's be honest. Are you in debt? Did you take out a loan for that dress? We all know what food service pays. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but let's not pretend you belong here." The air grew thick. The old dynamic had settled over the table like a shroud. I was the charity case, the failure, the one they had to tolerate. I could feel the familiar tightness in my chest, the feeling of being cornered and judged. But something was different tonight. The anger was new. It was a clean, cold flame, and it was giving me strength. That was the moment the charade ended. That was the instant I decided to burn their world to the ground. The silence that followed Serafina's question was thick and suffocating, a weapon in itself. Her words, Can you even afford this place hung in the air, a deliberate, perfectly crafted insult designed to put me, the family failure, back in my place? I could see the discomfort flicker across even my mother's face. This was a breach of their unspoken code. The quiet condescension had become outright cruelty. I felt the familiar hot flush of shame rise in my chest, a ghost of the girl I used to be. 5 years of hard work, of building a life, of achieving a level of success they couldn't even comprehend, and in their eyes nothing had changed. I opened my mouth to respond, the truth a burning coal on my tongue, ready to set their entire, carefully constructed world on fire. But before I could speak, Caspian interrupted, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He had been studying the leather-bound bill folder with a frown, sensing an opportunity to reassert his dominance after the shock of the total cost. "Wait a minute," he announced, his voice loud and performative. "There's a mistake here." He waved his hand sharply, a gesture of impatient authority. "Waiter, excuse me. There's an error on our check." Marco, my most senior and trusted manager, approached the table with the perfect, serene timing of a seasoned actor hitting his mark. He had been watching our table all night, his loyalty a silent, steady presence at the edge of my vision. "Is there a problem, Sir Marco?" asked, his voice the epitome of professional calm. "Yes, there's a problem," Caspian said, tapping the bill with a manicured finger. He was enjoying this, the chance to point out the incompetence of an establishment he clearly felt was overpriced and pretentious. "You've only charged us for the beverages. The entire meal, 7 tasting menus, has been omitted." Marco took the folder. He glanced at the bill, his face impassive. Then his eyes lifted and met mine across the table. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, but the question was clear in his gaze. "Now, Ms. Vance." The cold flame of anger in my chest solidified into something hard and clear as diamond. The charade was over. I gave him a single deliberate nod. Marco turned back to Caspian, his expression smoothing into one of polite clarification. "There is no error, sir," he said, his voice carrying with perfect clarity in the suddenly quiet dining room. "The dinner portion has been taken care of." A wave of confusion washed over the table. "Taken care of, my father?" Richard demanded, his brow furrowed. "By whom? We haven't authorized any payment." And then it happened. The moment the entire evening had been building towards. The culmination of 5 years of silent struggle and secret success. Marco turned his body fully towards me, no longer addressing the men at the table. His professional demeanor melted away, replaced by a smile of genuine warmth and profound respect. He gave a slight bow. "By the owner, sir," he said, his voice ringing with a pride that was both personal and professional. Then, looking directly at me, he delivered the final devastating line. "Welcome back, Ms. Vance. Your usual table in the private dining room is prepared for your meeting with the investors. Shall I handle this situation first?" The silence that fell was not like the others. It was not heavy or oppressive. It was a vacuum, a void created by the complete and utter implosion of their reality. 6 pairs of eyes swiveled to me, their expressions a slow-motion cascade of disbelief. Caspian's jaw was literally hanging open, his smugness replaced by a look of blank, uncomprehending shock. Serafina's face had gone pale, her eyes wide with a confusion so profound it looked like fear. My mother's hand had flown to her pearls, her social armor completely shattered. And my father's face was a fascinating spectacle of warring emotions. The initial shock was quickly being overridden by the rapid calculations of a CEO facing a hostile takeover. Julian just stared, his eyes finally meeting mine, and in them I saw the dawning of a horrified understanding. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins sharpened into a laser-like focus. I finally rose from my seat, the simple black dress suddenly feeling like a suit of armor. I looked at Marco. "Thank you, Marco," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Yes. Please close out Mr. Harrington's beverage tab. The rest, of course, is on the house." "Very good, Ms. Vance," he replied, taking the bill folder from Caspian's limp, unresisting fingers. He paused for a moment, adding the final touch. "Chef Dubois mentioned he'd like your opinion on the new spring menu concepts when you have a moment." "I'll stop by the kitchen before my meeting," I assured him. As Marco departed with the quiet efficiency of a loyal general, I finally turned my full attention to my stunned family. I let them sit in the deafening silence for a long moment, letting the impossible truth sink into their consciousness. What is happening?" my mother finally whispered, her voice trembling. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The insecure girl they had raised was gone. The woman who stood before them was someone else entirely. "Welcome to Ethelgard," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "My restaurant." "Impossible," Serafina blurted out the word, a choked gasp. This is one of the most acclaimed restaurants in the city. It was just featured in Gourmet Traveler." Yes, I agreed, allowing myself a small, mirthless smile. Last month, Bon Appetit was the month before. The New York Times gave us 4 stars last year. My father finally found his voice, his tone careful, calculating. "Your restaurant. You work here." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, an attempt to force reality back into a shape he could understand. "No, father," I corrected him, feeling a strange, liberating calm settle over me. "I don't work here. I own here. I am the executive chef and sole proprietor of Ethelgard." I let my gaze sweep over their shocked faces. "You were all so vague about everything," Caspian stammered, trying to make sense of it all. "I was vague," I explained, "because I wanted to see how you would treat me if you believed I was still the family failure, the struggling cook, the disappointment, and you have all made that abundantly, painfully clear tonight." I turned my eyes to my father. "You dismissed my wine list, a list I spent months curating. You compared my signature dish, a dish that has been celebrated by the world's top critics, to the fanciful failures of your own mother." I felt the locket warm now against my skin. "Let me tell you something about my grandmother's passion. That so-called failure was the only real inheritance I ever cared about, and it's the foundation upon which this entire establishment was built. Every brick, every plate, every success you are sitting in the middle of was born from the very passion you so arrogantly mocked." "But why wouldn't you tell us?" Serafina asked, her voice small and bewildered. The anger and superiority had vanished, replaced by the raw humiliation of being so completely wrong. I looked directly at her, letting the full weight of my 5 years of silence fall into my final words. I didn't say it with anger. I said it with the calm finality of a judge delivering a verdict. Because I wanted to see you, all of you, unfiltered. I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer you, when you believed I was beneath you. And tonight, you showed me everything. I didn't need to say another word. The truth of it, the poetic justice, was a devastating force that left them utterly speechless. I picked up my clutch from the table, my movements deliberate and unhurried. I had a meeting to get to. A real one. I turned to leave, leaving them to sit in the wreckage of their own judgment. The battle was over, but as I walked away from the table, away from the life I had escaped, I knew the journey was just beginning. I didn't storm out of Ethelgard that night. I walked my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space between their shattered silence and my newfound peace. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I felt no compulsion to gauge their reactions, to see if the seeds of truth I had planted had taken root. The battle I had been fighting for 5 years, or perhaps my entire life, was over. But as I stepped out into the cool night air, I understood that the war for a new kind of family, for healing, was a different, more complicated campaign that was only just beginning. The days that followed were quiet. The silence from my family was no longer the heavy, judgmental silence of disapproval, but the hollow, echoing silence of shock. The first crack appeared 3 days later in the form of a text message on my phone from a number I hadn't heard from in years. It was from Julian. "Ilara, I'm sorry. For everything. For that night. For not speaking up. I'm just sorry." It was clumsy and hesitant, but it was real. It was the first apology I had ever received from a member of my immediate family. I simply texted back, "Thank you, Julian." A week later, my mother called. Her voice, usually so crisp and commanding, was uncertain. She didn't fill the silence with edicts or social arrangements. She asked questions, hesitant, fumbling questions about the restaurant. "How many staff do you employ? Is it very difficult managing the purveyors?" She was trying to understand, trying to see my world through a lens other than disappointment. It was a conversation I never thought we would have. My father, Richard Vance, did not call. His pride, I knew, was a fortress too thick to breach with a simple telephone call. But Julian called again a few days after that, his voice a strange mix of awe and amusement. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Dad, he He went to the public library, like inside one. He came home with a stack of books, all about the world's most influential female chefs. I smiled. It was not an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. It was his own silent, stubborn way of trying to read the language he had never bothered to learn. The most surprising communication came from Serafina. An email with no subject line arrived late one night. It was short-stripped of her usual biting wit. "He's gone. Caspian moved out. I think maybe you were right about more than just the duck." The admission was staggering. It was a white flag, a concession that her perfect pedigreed life was just as flawed as the one she had always mocked. The gilded cage had bars after all. I realized then that the next move had to be mine, but it would be on my terms, my turf. I sent a group text to my mother, Father Julian, and Serafina. Brunch, Sunday, 11 a.m. I gave them the address of a small, bustling cafe in a part of the city they would consider gritty. It was a place run by a friend, a brilliant chef who made the best shakshuka in the city out of a kitchen the size of my mother's walk-in closet. No reservations, no valet, no pretense. When they arrived, they looked deeply uncomfortable, like royalty forced to mingle with the commoners. My father eyed the mismatched chairs with suspicion. My mother subtly wiped her fork with a napkin. But then the food came. Simple, rustic, and so profoundly delicious it silenced all criticism. I watched as my father, the man who had scoffed at my fanciful experiments, mopped up the last of his egg yolk with a piece of sourdough. I saw Serafina, looking tired but relieved, take a genuine, unforced bite of a lemon ricotta pancake. The conversation was stilted, awkward. We talked around the chasm that had opened between us. But for the first time, we talked to each other, not at each other. It was a new beginning. A fragile one, but a beginning nonetheless. Later that week, I found myself alone in the kitchen of Ethelgard, long after the last customer had gone. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the soft glow of the service lights. The air smelled of baked bread and citrus. My sanctuary, my empire. I reached under my collar and pulled out the old silver locket. I opened it, looking at the familiar, worn engraving of the olive branch. For 5 years, I thought my goal was to shove my success in my family's face, to make them see me, to force their validation. I had thought the victory would be in their defeat, in the moment they had to admit they were wrong. But as I stood there, in the quiet heart of everything I had built, I realized the truth. The true success wasn't the look on their faces when they learned I was the owner. It wasn't their grudging respect or their fumbling attempts to reconnect. Those things were just echoes. The real victory had happened long before that dinner. It happened in the quiet moments of grueling work, in the bond with my kitchen staff, in the first perfect dish I created, in the silent nod of approval from Chef Dubois, in the courage to take a chance on a mysterious investor's belief in me. I had built my own legacy, one that had nothing to do with the Vance name. It was a legacy built from my grandmother's passion, Anya's kindness, my mentor's discipline, and my own relentless, stubborn refusal to be anything other than myself. I didn't need to be welcomed back into their world. I had created my own, and in this world I was already home.